I'm going to begin here. I'm going to share my screen. I think this should be, okay, I sent this to everyone. You see what's on my screen?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to do something slightly different than what we normally do, only because it is almost, it's almost Purim and it's almost Pesach right after that, Elian. See, you know me too well. This Shabbos, so this Shabbos is very exciting. I announced it in shul, and because, I clearly don't get out enough, but it's very, very exciting because this Shabbos we get to take out 3 Sifrei Torah. Okay, so there's only 4 times a year that it's possible. It doesn't ever happen in the same year, but there are 4 possible occasions where we could read from 3 Sifrei Torah on one Shabbos. Anybody want to take a guess?
Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Hanukkah.
Okay, that's one. So my Hebrew birthday is Rosh Chodesh Chanukah, and I was that nerd who wanted, when they were figuring out my bar mitzvah, like when I figured out when I was like 7, that I wanted so badly that my bar mitzvah should fall out on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Chanukah. But alas, it did not. And I was very disappointed because, I just wanted the cool bar mitzvah. I should have known then where my career was going. Okay, so that's one. What are the other 3? One happens, one of the other 3 happens every year regardless.
Pesach?
Nope. Bum, 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 bum.
No idea.
Simchas Torah.
Oh.
Yeah, it always gets lost in this kind of question. We don't look at it as unique.
It's fair.
Why? We read one from Zos HaBracha, one from Bereshis, and one from Maftir, from Parshas Pinchas. So the other 2 are very much related. So one which is going to happen this Shabbos is Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Shekalim. And the other one is Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Parshas HaChodesh. So when we say Shekalim is the beginning of what's known as the 4 Parshios, Daled Parshios. And we have 4 special readings, each for a specific reason. And the first of them is Shekalim. Now, let's be honest. When you start hearing Parsha Shekalim, there's only one thing that enters your mind. You're like, oh no, it's coming. You're like, Shekalim means that Purim is around the corner. If Purim is around the corner, then you know what? You know what's coming right behind it, okay? I have not been to ShopRite lately, but I don't know if they changed the aisles yet or if they're working on it. After Valentine's Day, I don't know. And, remember the difference between Pesach this year and last year, I give up. So Shekalim. So anybody know why we do what is Shekalim? What's the relationship of Shekalim to the 4 parshas? Like why now? What it's always read the Shabbos of or right at Rosh Chodesh Adar. So this Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh, or Friday and Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh Adar, and then it's also Shekalim. So what's the connection between Adar and Shekalim and the 4 parshas? Any ideas?
Having to do with Purim?
Okay, so what about, you're saying good, say better.
Matanot Levyonim.
Yeah.
Matanot Levyonim, okay. So why would we have something that that makes an announcement to do with like only one of the mitzvahs of Purim? Why don't we have a reading that corresponds to, let's say, Mishloach Manos or Seudas Purim or reading of the Megillah? Right, so we always associate Machzis HaShekel, the half-shekel, with Matanos LaEvyonim, but in actuality, they're really not that related. The source of Shekalim, of giving Shekalim, by the way, there's a tractate known as Shekalim. It's actually Mishnah through Shalmi. And for some reason, it's included in the Daf Hayomi. The Daf Hayomi is in Pesachim now. And when it finishes Pesachim, it goes to Shekalim. Before then, it goes on to all the Moadim Mesechtas. But Shekalim is the half-shekel. So let's put it this way. It commemorates the half-shekel. When was the half-shekel given? We know which
Rosh
like
Chodesh?
right.
Rosh Chodesh?
Rosh Chodesh what? Well, it was announced Rosh Chodesh. So I have here. I can actually take it out and show you because I'm in the. I keep here in my drawer. We have these. I mean, if you could see this, it's taped together. $3.50. Okay, you see that? 3 Kennedy $half. It actually does have the likeness of. Well, it's taped together, but you can see our John F. Kennedy. Okay, so ask not what you could do for your shekel, but ask what your shekel can do for you. Something like that. And we do is we put them in a bowl, and then people they pick it up. They put money in, they pick it up. So it's an interesting question that's coming up quite prominently this year is what do we do this year about Machzah Shekel if people don't want to touch the money, right? I imagine for a lot of people, maybe even people here, like when's the last time you actually handled money, right? Everything is all digital and whatever. And maybe we could do like Bitcoin. We'll get Elon Musk to do some Bitcoin for us for Halavai, right? Well, I'll never understand that. Okay, I'm a simple person. I don't understand these things. Anyway, the Half-Shekel, which we do, so we do that on Purim, and the money usually goes to Matanas Levyonim, which is the connection that people are thinking of. But the actual commandment, it was given, every Jew had to give at different points. They had to give half-shekels, 3 different half-shekels, but it mostly went for what's called Bedek Habayis, which means the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. And it was done in Adar because everybody had to bring communal sacrifices in Nisan. So in a month advance notice, they would have these shekels were given so that the Beis HaMikdash, everybody would remember to give sort of like, it's like the dues reminder. They would get their dues, they would announce the Shekalim, and everyone would have to give it so that they would have enough resources in a very, very busy month of Nisan for the Beis HaMikdash and all of their needs. That's why, so the half-shekel is actually more connected to Pesach than it is to Purim in that sense. Zachor, which is the second of the 4 parashios, is only about Purim. That's why it's always the Shabbos before Purim that it's read. And it is to commemorate, we have to read and we have to commemorate the fact that of course that the Haman comes from Amalek, and we have to remember the mitzvah of getting rid of Amalek, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's why, and the victory over Haman is a victory over Amalek. That's why we read it right before Purim. The third of the 4 parashios is Para, which reads the laws of the Para Aduma. Again, that's a Pesach halacha, because since everybody had to bring the Korban Pesach, they had to make sure that everybody had time to purify in case they were in a situation where they would not be allowed to bring the Korban Pesach. So if the reasons why you couldn't bring a Korban Pesach is if somebody was ritually impure, came in contact with a dead body, or if, let's say, a person was not circumcised, lots of exclusions, but there are ways to remedy those. And if somebody was ritually impure, having come in contact with a dead body, they would have to go through the purification process of the Para Aduma. It's not like they did that every other day. I mean, it was a very rare occurrence, it seems, and that they would first be able to find the Para Aduma and then also use it. The Gemara has discussions about how many times there actually were a Para Aduma and were they ever used. And the fourth one is Parshat HaChodesh, where we read from Exodus chapter 12, from Parak Yud Beis in Shmos, in which we, of course, announce the Korban Pesach. That's the Shabbos, right, corresponding with or right around Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it turns out that 3 of the 4 of the readings are very much Pesach-oriented and not so much Purim-oriented. Shekalim is always before Adar, because that's the first one, but it's because it had to be a month before Nisan Pesach. So what I want to share with you is we have a couple of biblical, of a Talmudic source of Rishonim, and one interesting insight, which will sort of connect it to Purim, and we'll see in a homiletic fashion about the importance of the shekel to Purim. Because you think about like today, like, okay, we announced the half-shekel. Like, I mean, come on, really? So what does Shekalim do for us? It means that we don't say Avarachamim and Shul. It doesn't have all that much import, but since we're coming upon Purim and it's Rosh Chodesh, we should start thinking about it. So the first thing we have is the Mishnah and Gemara in Megillah, which is the first source on our page. So I put it in English for you. When the first of Adar falls on Shabbos, the portion of Shekalim, you could see this is not my translation, by the way, because I didn't do, Exodus 3:2 it's actually 30. It's 30 verse 2, is to be read. That's the beginning of Parshas Kisisa. So when the first of Adar falls on Shabbos, so that's this year, by the way, the first of Adar, right? If we take out the Hebrew calendar, and we have a Friday Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and if I look at Mishpatim, Rosh Chodesh Adar 1 is February 13th, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Parshat Shekalim. So here we go. The Mishnah talks about exactly our case this year. So if the first of Adar falls on Shabbos, Shekalim is to be read. If it falls on any other day, then that portion must be read on the preceding Shabbos, and nothing additional is read on the following Shabbos. So we know we have kind of like when it comes to the 4 parshas, they're never in a row. It's like an on-off type of thing. But again, it depends on how the calendar falls out. So this year, since Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, we didn't read it last week. We read Shekalim this week. Okay. On the second, the portion Zachor is to be read. Remember that's Zachor, meaning on the second of the 4 Shabboses. On the third, the red heifer, which is para. On the fourth, hachodesh, that of the new moon. And on the fifth, they return again to the regular order. And by the way, interestingly enough, even though we have 4 special Shabboses, there's actually 5 because one of them is Shabbos HaGadol. This year in particular, it's going to be very, very complicated, exciting for people like me, again, who don't get out much. But Purim falls out this year on a Friday. Okay, so that means, we have to figure out, like, when do you have your Purim Suda? Your Purim Suda, is it like 11 in the morning, or I don't know, because then you have to have a Shabbos meal at night. And in Israel, it's something called Purim Meshulish, because the way Purim falls out in Yerushalayim versus everywhere else, Purim falls out on Shabbos in Yerushalayim, which is wild. So they actually observe it on Sunday. So they have Purim on Friday, on Shabbos, and on Sunday. But whenever a Purim Meshulish happens, that means that for sure, you're going to have something exciting, which is that Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. So the first Seder is Saturday night. Hasn't happened in a while. It'll happen again in another couple of years. Then it won't happen for like another 20 years, something like that, if you're into dates and schedule. So the 5th Shabbos is known as Shabbos HaGadol. There's an interesting question is, like, we have a tradition of doing a Shabbos HaGadol drasha on Shabbos. Do you do it on Erev Pesach, or do you do it the week before? But technically, Shabbos HaGadol this year falls on Erev Pesach. However, just as something we'll talk about more probably communally as we go on, and you're going to hear a lot about this, is that presents some very interesting questions. Because we know on Erev Pesach, that you have to finish eating chametz by a certain time, right? So it's always like, last time I could eat chametz is 10:14 in the morning. Last time to burn the chametz is 11:30 in the morning. And that's always on Erev Pesach. What happens if that's Shabbos? So we run into a couple. First of all, how do I burn chametz on Shabbos? Okay, so this is easy for us because we had last year. And last year, where we didn't have any burnings of chametz because of a pandemic, and there were no people getting together. What he said, he told everybody what? Flush it. Okay, so the same thing happens now. But what about not eating chametz after a certain time? So you'll say, well, what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal, is that every Shabbos, we're required to have a Shabbos meal. And at the Shabbos meal, you're required to have 2 loaves of bread, right? You have to have lechem mishnah. So what are you supposed to eat? So if you're going to say you want to eat challah, and God bless your soul, if you're bold enough to do that, you're going to sit in the corner, wrapped up in plastic or whatever. You're going to put on your PPE, and you're going to wear, you're going to eat, to keep the challah from getting where. If you want to do that, then you have to finish eating by 10:14 in the morning or whatever the time is. You're not allowed to eat matzah because you can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. And most people have the custom even already from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, or even 30 days before, not to eat matzah. So what are you supposed to do? So we come up with this ingenious solution where this is the one time where we sanction, if you're not aged or infirmed, to eat egg matzah. Is that we will use egg matzah, which we don't accept it as matzah, but it's not really chametz either. So it'll fulfill the in-between. So we eat egg matzah on this Shabbos for the meal, unless you're so bold that you want to eat challah and put it away and flush the crumbs and not be worried about it over Pesach. But good luck with that. But we run into another question is if they have to finish eating the chametz by a certain time, like 10:15 in the morning, that means I have to be home after davening at 10:15 in the morning, which means that davening that Shabbos will be very, very early. Davening starts at like 7 o'clock. Everybody, we daven at 7, we finish at 9, you get home, you have your meal, The one benefit of that, though, is that that's the one Seder that everybody's awake for. Because you're not making yourself meshuga Erev Pesach because you have it Shabbos. Everything has to be done already. So if everything's done, you could rest on Shabbos. You could, look into a Haggadah or whatever. So it's, I always look at the bright side of things. Anyway, that is, and of course, like this year, of course, that's what's going to happen this year. I mean, I'm like, why wouldn't it, right? Let's add on one other crazy thing to this year. I mean, of course, why not? Anyway, so that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues. The regular order of the Aftaroth, I don't know what Aftaroth is. I know what a Haftorah is to be interrupted on the days of the new moon. Chanukah, fine. That's okay. That's another Haftorah halacha. Let's see what the Gemara. The Gemara says, we have learned in the Mishnah and Shekalim. So the Gemara in Megillah quotes a Mishnah and Shekalim. It's the very first Mishnah and Shekalim. Okay, it's the very beginning of it. On the first day of the month of Adar, warnings are heralded from Jerusalem concerning Shekalim and Kilayim. That on the first of Adar, they start announcing about Shekalim and Kilayim. What is Kilayim? Kilayim is mixing shatnez, like not sewing certain things together and not having things in your garment. You can't have wool and linen together, but Kilayim, usually referring to Kalai HaKerem or Kalayim Basada, is certain plants that you can't plant two different species together. That's a violation of Torah law. So it says about Kalayim, it's the time of sowing. Therefore, it's right that it's heralded they should have no Kalayim, but whence do we deduce that Shekalim must be heralded on the first of Adar? So he says Kalayim I understand because things are starting to thaw out, and in the rain season, it's starting to end, and people are going to start planting. So therefore, we have to give an announcement and say, okay, make sure you don't plant the wrong things together. But what does it have to do about Shekalim? Why does Shekalim have to be an Adar? So Rav Tebi says in the name of Yoshia, because it says, this is the burnt offering of the new moon for every month. The expression is Chodesh Bechadsho, new and it's new. That means that the Torah said, renew it. You shall bring ye, I like ye, you never get to use the word ye enough. Ye shall bring the offerings from the new taxes of the year. And as with the first of Nisan begins the new year, it must be heralded in Adar that the new taxes shall be collected before or on the first of Nisan for the purpose that they might be brought in time to the temple. So if I use today's modern day analogy, this is on the first of Adar. Since the new fiscal year starts in Nisan, we bill in Adar, and hopefully by the time they get the bill in the first of Adar until the first of Nisan, people are paying their tithes, their dues, whatever it is, their obligations, and therefore they can now be in good stead. The temple, the Beis HaMikdash, can be in good stead as it's a very, very busy month in Nisan. It's the first of the year. Okay, fine. So it's kind of also like, in December, when all the people remind you want to get your tax donations in, you want to get your dedications in, whatever it is, to finish out that year. In a similar vein, we want to make sure that everybody has the ability to pay, and the temple and the Beis HaMikdash will have the funds that are needed to handle the great volume that's going to be taking place in the month of Nisan. Okay, fine. That is the Mishnah and the Gemara source for Shekalim. Let's look at a couple of Rishonim sources. So we have two sources here, one from the Sefer Abu Draham and one from the Sefer Achinuch. The Abu Draham, one of the early Spanish Rishonim, probably in the 1300s, and he wrote extensively. His Sefer is called Abu Draham, but his Sefer goes through many of the ritual practices that we have, particularly through the Siddur and the davening. And he enumerates kind of the customs and the reasons that we have. So we often use this, especially when we're learning Orach Chaim, that we use this as a source for understanding why we say certain things, why we do certain things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so here's what he says. Vitam arba parshios elu. He says, we have the 4 parshios. He says, hashalosh mehem. He says, 3 of the 4 are zecher lizman shebeis hamikdash kayam. They are a commemoration of the time when the Beis HaMikdash was standing. V'heim Shekalim, Para Aduma, and HaChodesh. He says they are not Zachar, because Zachar is a constant obligation. We know everybody has to hear Zachar. It's a Torah mitzvah, etc., etc. He says, why is that? Again, he quotes the aforementioned Mishnah, which our Gemara had quoted as well, that on the first of Adar, they would start announcing about the Shekalim. Shahatorah Amra Zos Olas Chodesh Bechachol Lechachei Hashana. We learn from this that this is from Rosh Chodesh. The Amar Bechad Show. What does it mean? The time, the month in its month. Kolomar Chadesh v'Haveli Karba Mitruma Shekalim Chadashim. Bring from the new tithes, from the new karbanos. Lefichach Mashmian Chodesh Echad Kodem Nisan. Therefore, we announced it 30 days, 1 month before Nisan. Kadesh Yachin Kol Echad ve'Echad Machatzis HaShekel Shalo, so that everybody can have their appropriate funds ready. Via kol gavoy umuva lemikdash kashiyavo Nisan, and again, similar to the Gemara, that everything should be done and ready in the month of Nisan. Okay, so it seems that if I would ask you, according to the Abu Draham, when did they start? When did the institution of reading Shekalim or announcing Shekalim, like that we have now, our version of reading Shekalim, when did it start?
Well, it says it's in Bar Midbar. Did they do it before?
Right. So they had, in other words, they had, just like they did it in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So we're just continuing that practice, which always was, is that they would announce, they would say, listen, people, it's time. Here's the reminder. It's time to do it. Okay.
Would they start to do it before they even came to the land? That's my question. Or was it a commandment for the future?
It was a commandment probably when they got into the land of Israel. Right. Although like for the Mishkan, you could probably argue that it was done in the Midbar also, because they had the Mishkan, they had the same Karban Pesach. Although, like practically speaking, the Gemara discusses that they only brought the Karban Pesach like once in the Midbar, like the first year, and for the rest of the 40 years they never brought it for whatever reasons. It's a whole, that's an historical conversation combined with a halakha conversation. But let's say that from the outset they had the announcement was made, fine, just like the announcement was made. We're going to continue making the announcement the same way. The Sefer Achinuch, again, which is one of many Sfarim which enumerate and count the 613 mitzvahs, we can never underscore this enough, the importance of those who were what's called minuhei mitzvahs, people who counted mitzvahs, because we know that there's 613 mitzvahs. How do we know there's supposed to be 613, by the way? You ever wonder, like, why 613?
Something to do with the muscles in the body or the ligaments or something in the body that corresponds.
Well, we say that there are 365 negative commandments, and there are 365 something in your body, and there are 248 positive commandments, and there are 248 like ligaments, sinews, whatever. I have not identified all 365, but I think that's sort of like why we have the correspondence between the number, but that doesn't explain why we have the 613. Where do we get the number 613 from? Taryag, right? It's not like we always we accept that as like we know that. If you would ask anybody in the world how many mitzvahs are there, oh yeah, 613. Right, 613 Torah Avenue. Right, the Rechnetzer's Reject or whatever it is that you listen to as a kid. Okay. So it's actually Gemara. The Gemara towards the end of Maseches Makos, and the Gemara says a drasha that from the pasuk. The pasuk says Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Okay, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Now let's figure out what is the gematria. Here we go. What is the gematria of the word Torah? Okay, so Tuf is 400. Okay, I need a calculator for this because I can't. Okay, I'm running out of fingers. So Tuf is 400. Reish is 200. So that leaves us with a Vav and a Hey. So Vav and a Hey, a 6 and a 5 is
11.
So that gives us 611. Oh! So the Gemara says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe gave us 611 mitzvahs, and 2 came directly from God, the first 2 of the commandments that we read last week, and that's where we get the number 613. Okay, so therefore we're kind of locked into this magic number of 613.
Like a gematria, that's pretty amazing.
Right? Right? Go figure. You'd be amazed how many things are because of like, wow, gematria. But that's a drush in the Gemara. So that's a holy number. That's set in stone. We can't change it. The question is, what are they? And I bet that if you would try and go through the Chumash and you try to assess which are the 613 mitzvahs, you would come up with a lot more. A lot more. Not to mention that we have this tradition also of the 365, 248 breakdown. So therefore, many of the Rishonim, including the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Ramban, and the Sefer HaChinuch, and the Smag, and the Smak, and the Sefer Yereim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, all, and even as early as the Gaon, Rav Sadia Gaon, they had to figure out what are the 613. So the Rambam, for instance, has in the introduction to the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he has certain categories of exclusions. In other words, he has to go through and saying, well, you might think this is counted, but it's not for this reason. So he has to give sort of categories of, well, why would this yes or no be counted? So we find that amongst all the different counters of the mitzvos that there's differences. Why? So then they have questions. Why would the Rambam count this and the Ramban didn't? So the Sefer HaChinuch is one of the most notable counters, Moneh HaMitzvos, counters of mitzvos. And he says, and again, so this is, but that's why it says number 105. That's the Sefer HaChinuch is just counting all the mitzvahs. He counts his mitzvah 105, and this is part of that. Again, it's an interesting study to learn Sefer HaChinuch. But he says, he says nowadays, because of our sins, that we do not have a Beis HaMikdash, we do not have half shekels. So nagu kol Yisrael lizkar hadavar likros beis hakneses or lezecher hadavar likros beis hakneses bechol shana v'shana parsha zu shel kisisa ad v'lokachta ad kesef haKippurim b'Shabbos hulufnei Rosh Chodesh Adar le'olam. He says now that we no longer have a Beis HaMikdash and we no longer have a shekel, nebuch. So therefore, to commemorate what used to be done, that people would give the half shekel, we now have this announcement of the half shekel. So it would seem, if you read these carefully, we have an interesting machlokas in the Rishonim that according to the Abu Jaham, they're just continuing what was always done. According to the Sefer HaChinuch, the institution of reading Parshat Shekalim or announcing Parshat Shekalim only comes as a result of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And beforehand, they didn't do it. They just gave it. They told people, they reminded people, and people gave it. But the reading, he says, therefore, the reading in the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, which we're going to read the Shabbos, is only an institution which is what's called Zecher LeMikdash. Now, you'll say, like, what's the difference? Well, let's read something here from Rav Yonasan Eibshitz, a very, very fascinating piece. And here it's something, a sefer called Yaros Devash. And this will bring it and tie it together to Purim, and you're going to see something really fantastic here. Okay. So here's the Yaros Devash. V'hinei Amru. The Gemara Megillah. He quotes the Gemara Megillah. Gailuya yedul lefnei mi v'chulei. Shehaman asid lishkol aseres alafim kikar kesef. We knew, he says it was revealed to the world, etc., that how did Haman convince Achashverosh? Again, now we got to start thinking about the story, right? We got to start revealing. We got to start thinking about it. How did Haman ultimately convince Achashverosh to pass his decree against the Jewish people?
Well, there was definitely anti-Semitism involved.
No. I'm not talking about the motivation.
Okay.
Why did Achashverosh agree to it?
Taxes.
Money.
Taxes.
He gave him money. It wasn't taxes. It was a bribe, a straight up bribe. It says, the Megillah says, and Haman handed over, and what's the word? Aseres alafim kikar kesef, and he uses the word lishkol, shekel, lishkol aseres alaf. He gave tens of thousands of silver coins to Achashverosh. He says, lefichach. The Gemara says, lefichach hiktim shkoleihem lishkolav. Therefore, the Jewish people gave their shekels first to counteract his shekels. What does it mean? So look at this drush. This is a beautiful drush here. Disnan be'echad ba'adar mashmian ala shkalim. we announced, again, we just saw the Mishnah in Shekalim that on the first of Adar, they would start announcing that people should give their shekels. The Hikshim Maharsha, the Maharsha asks, Hagzeres Haman, Haya B'Yud Gimel B'Nisan. He says, we know that the Gzera of Haman was when? On the 13th of Nisan, which is an interesting question because when we talk, let's say we fast, Tainus Esther is when? On the 13th of Adar, when it can be, when it's not a Shabbos or whatever, okay? Why do we fast? Why do we fast at the fast of Esther? So ostensibly, it's because of the fast that she instituted when she had to go speak to the king to nullify the decree, etc., and then to save her people. If you look at the Megillah carefully, she told her people for 3 days to fast. It was on Pesach. It was on Nisan. So the Maharsha asks, he says, wait a minute. The Gzeira of Haman was on the 13th of Nisan. K'dichsiv b'Megillah is written quite explicitly. He says, why does it say that, to announce on the first of Adar a month before, which is only an announcement? They should have said, oh no, when they gave the Gemara said that they brought their shekels to counteract his shekels. But why does it say that they announced it a month earlier? It should have said on the first of Nisan, they brought it, they had already given their shekalim, and this is before the 13th. He says, and therefore that would counteract what Haman was going to do. He says, he says, no matter how many Jews there were, if they would each give a half shekel, how could that possibly, it's not even going to come close to tens of thousands of shekels that Haman gave. He says, he says, no. He says, it must be that the Jewish people had been giving the half shekel already for years and years. He says, that's why they gave it so much earlier. He says, what difference does it make if it's the first of Adar? He says, by the way, we know the story of Purim. Important historical context to put it in. Again, we'll ask it this question. Which story came first, Hanukkah or Purim? In the history of the Jewish people, which story came first?
Purim.
Purim came first because Purim was in between the first and second Beis HaMikdash. As a direct result of the story of Purim, permission was then granted ultimately for the Jewish people to go back to the land of Israel and rebuild the second temple, time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Not so many people went. We've talked about that in past at length, about how comfortable the Jewish people were in the diaspora. Okay, the story of Purim took place, the story of Hanukkah took place during the second temple period. And as a result of the Hanukkah story and the victory, and then the Greek Hellenists, Assyrians, then Hashmonaim leading to the Idumeans, leading to the Romans, leading to the Roman destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, the story of Purim, it's kind of a trick question because Hanukkah comes first in the year, if we're counting from Tishrei. Even if we count from Nisan, it's still first. But we think of it like I don't know how, no matter where I am, and I'll probably have no more kids at school. I'm always thinking by the school year. Like I always work kind of like on September or really Rosh Hashanah. We never think of anything else. We don't think January, we still don't think Pesach. But since Hanukkah comes before Purim, we always think it's first, but in actuality, Purim came first. He says, but if there was no Beis HaMikdash, so there's no Beis HaMikdash in Purim, what are they bringing the Shekalim for? Why would you say they're bringing Shekalim?
Bringing the Shekalim to?
What?
Who are they bringing the Shekalim to?
Oh, so why were they giving? Like, who are they giving? Exactly. He says, right? Because he says, even in Shekalim, the Mishnah says, Bisman she'ein beis bayis, ein chayvim b'Shekalim. He says, if there's no Beis HaMikdash, there's no obligation to bring the shekel. He says, so then, furthermore, why do you have to say that they brought it on the first of Adar? What do you mean? They have collected from years and years from when the Beis HaMikdash stood. So what does it mean the month of Adar? These are the questions of the Maharsha. So look what Rabbi Yodason Eibshitz says, and he tells us a tremendous chiddush, but it's an important lesson about how Parshat Shekalim really gets us thinking about Purim and where we should be. Aval lahavin, lama yigina Parshat Shekalim. He says, and then to ask you to explain what is the protection that was offered by the reading of Shekalim or the giving of Shekalim. Huki Yisrael Nenshu Shenena Misudas Achashverosh. If you go back to the beginning of the Gemara and Megillah, we're actually almost at that point in our Gemara Shiur, we're learning Megillah. He says, why were the Jewish people punished with the story of Purim? Why did Hashem allow the decree of Haman to take place? And it says, because they nenu misudas Achashverosh. They partook and they enjoyed from the Suda that Achashverosh that he held. He says, V'hainu af kilo achu davar aser chas v'shalom. Is rakasuda haisa v'hasimcha shisro lo yigala od kemevur. He says, V'heimnenu mizeh v'nisiyashu gam ken megeula. And even though, by the way, it says everything was glak kosher, and they had like chasidish shechita, and the wine was mavushal, and no, God forbid, like there was no problem. There was not an issue of kashrus. But what happened is that because they became so entrenched in the Persian society, and mind you, since they're between the period of the first Beis HaMikdash and hoping to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash, the fact that they partook and everybody in society partook of that meal, it says, Nisyaishu came in Haga'ula. It shows that they gave up hope from redemption. They felt like, okay, this is our lot now. People tell you all the time, no matter how comfortable, and by the way, there probably has not been a period in history where our people have been more comfortable in a society than we are right now in United States of America, and something for which we have to be extremely grateful, but also we have to be extremely cognizant of that it's not going to last forever. And no matter how comfortable we are, our ultimate, we always talk about it. What are we talking about? Herb Yameinu Amen, Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Yerushalayim, Israel, Mashiach, etc. We can never give up from the Geula, no matter how comfortable you are. But there he says, that's why they got comfortable. They gave up from the Geula. B'shvil zeh chara af Hashem bam. And therefore Hashem was angry with them. U'umazeh. He says, now according to this, kasher hischel koresh livnos habayis v'hayu malim karbanos. At the time that Cyrus started to build the Beis HaMikdash, and they started to bring offerings, again, the second temple, the Snan Makrivan Al Shein Bias, because the Gemara says that even if you don't have Beis HaMikdash, you could still bring certain karbanos. So it says Hayu Yisrael Mafrish and Shekalim. The Jews therefore were separating Shekalim because even though they didn't yet have the Beis HaMikdash, but they were still giving funds for what would be the Beis HaMikdash or the offerings while the Beis HaMikdash was being rebuilt. Kasher Achashverosh Betchilas Malchuso Bitel Habinyan. So Koresh had started the building. Achashverosh comes to power. He stops the building. It's only as a result of the end of the story, 12 years later, that they allow the Beis HaMikdash building to continue or to resume, I should say. So he says, "Kasher Achashverosh b'tchilas malchuso bitel habinyan." So when Achashverosh starts his rule and he stops the building, okay, Hayirishayim lahavsikim lifrosh shekalim. Then they wouldn't have to bring the shekalim. If there's nothing to build for, there's nothing to contribute for, then why would they have to give the half shekel? Aval heim heviu shekaleihem. Rav Yonason says that no, the Jewish people still gave their shekels. Which the Gemara implies. Because they still gave the half shekel. But people say, wait, why are you giving the half shekel? There's no Beis HaMikdash, the building stopped. Right? They got a stop work order. No, they said, no, one day it'll be returned. One day it's going to be reversed. One day we're going to be able to have it, so we have to be ready. So they still gave their half shekel. And this was an atonement. They waited every year, and if it didn't happen, they said next year it's going to come, the next year it's going to come, the next year it's going to come. And every year at that time, they would still give their half shekel. V'hine yadua beParshat Pekudei ki samach ribu chatzei shekalim olim as kikar shel hakodesh shehu kikar kafel k'mevur b'Rashi Gemara im kain stam kikarm olim asayim kikarm. And he says he does the calculation based on the Gemara that based on all the years that they had given the half shekel, that indeed they had enough money to counterbalance what Haman had given to Achashverosh. So it comes out that actually the two answers of the Abu Draham and the Sefer HaChinuch, the Abu Draham says that they made an announcement in earlier times, and that's why we do it. He's not just saying like, oh, they just used to announce it, but part of the process of giving the half shekel was the announcement. And even in between the first and second Beis HaMikdash, the announcement, it wasn't just sort of like, okay, because we do it like we've always done it. It was a real announcement because it was saying, give the half shekel because the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt.
So they gave it like just their leadership who held on to it?
Yes, they kept it. They kept it in abeyance, and that sort of that. This is the chiddush of Yonasan Eibshitz, that they gave the half shekel, but not so much, not only the giving, but the announcing is part of the giving as well. No, that's part and parcel of the process. So when we make so when we commemorate the giving of the half shekel, how do we commemorate it? We commemorate it with an announcement. So therefore, the reading of Machzis HaShekel, what we do, is part of the commemoration of how they gave the half shekel. And for us, it should teach us that, you know what? Even in our darkest times, or even in a time when we're so entrenched in the diaspora, we should always be thinking about the Beis HaMikdash. So it's not just sort of a token, pun intended, a token giving of the shekel, or so therefore that's why we go through like, oh, let's like pick up the half shekel and put the money in and give it to tzedakah. It's part of Purim. So going back to our original question, even though we'll say that it initially was a Pesach commemoration because they had to be ready for Nisan to give all his karbanos. In actuality, according to Rabbi Yonasan, it was also very much part of the Purim story because it reflected that during the time of Purim, the people, even though they had become entrenched in the diaspora and maybe Hashem punished them, but at the same time, they also never truly gave up hope because they still paid their dues. They still longed for the binyan Beis HaMikdash, and this was evident in the fact that they had all the half shekel they kept giving. So it's a really interesting chiddush. Again, this is a chiddush. This is a chiddush of Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, but it's worth sharing that as we get through, and we think like all the time. We have this question all the time. We used to say every day in school. You're supposed to say it every day after davening. I believe in the coming of Mashiach, and even though he may tarry, I believe it. Like, do we really believe that Mashiach is coming? Good. Nancy believes. Good. Good.
Well, we give a lot of interpretations to what Mashiach is in order to make that belief more plausible.
Yeah.
But then why don't we do this now? Why don't we have like the Beis Mikdash fund now for the 3rd?
So you know what? We should. The difference is that there was a very distinct prophecy given after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. They knew about the 70 years. Achashverosh took that as a calculation and he made it wrong. If you want a really good treatment of this, if you have a copy of the art scroll Megillas Esther, in the introduction, they give the whole timetable and the whole prophecy of the 70 years. It's worth reading. But now it's sort of like, yeah, eventually, and there's not, and they knew then also that the second Beis HaMikdash would be fairly similar to the first Beis HaMikdash, indeed, which it was. Now, we don't necessarily know what the third Beis HaMikdash is going to be. We don't know.
You don't think we're doing karbanos anymore?
There's going to be karbanos, but there's going to be also, they say that the third one's going to come straight from heaven. We're not going to build it. But look, if you look, I'm sure people have seen. Have you seen the Temple Institute? And you've seen the reproduction of the Kalim that they have in the old city, et cetera, et cetera. It's there because people believe in it. The question is what's going to happen? But maybe it's not a bad idea. But we have to always notice we have to do something to be prepared for the ultimate redemption. Look, they talk about the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim used to have a suitcase packed, always in case Mashiach would come, right? So look, we have different ways of dealing with it, but I think that the value that's taught here in this Rabbi Yonasan, certainly when it comes to Parshat Shekalim, it's not just a commemoration reading only. That actually has a much deeper message. And the deeper message is that we always have to be prepared and we have to do something active, maybe that we're always doing, to be prepared for when the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. It's a little harder in our time, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it. So that's what we're constantly always saying in the davening, always referencing Beis HaMikdash, B'mher b'yameinu binyan, so many rabbis, they end their speech with the binyan, the building of the Beis HaMikdash. That's when you know that he's finally finishing. Like, oh my God, already, like enough already, like circle the drain, come on, land the plane. Then you hear binyan Beis HaMikdash, okay, he's ending, like that. But there's so many different ways, but we have to do something concrete. And here the concrete was the coins. And it's interesting that the Gemara says that they counterbalance the coins that they gave, counterbalance the coins. It was like a refuah before the makkah. It was the healing was given before the plague. So again, now we're full into Purim. We have a couple weeks, and especially now because I'm going to start talking about the Mishkan parshas. So no better time to start talking about Purim in our Shiur and start talking about Pesach. So yes, so now we can get the ball rolling. So everybody should have.
I have another question, and maybe
yes.
nobody knows this answer. Was the half shekel considered like a significant amount?
when you added it up.
No, for an individual person to give.
No, it wasn't insignificant, but it was something the idea was that everybody would be able to afford it. That's what the pasuk said. Look in the beginning of Kisisa. It says, "Ashir lo yarbev adalo yamit." That this way, poor man, rich man alike could give the same amount, and there would be no sort of class discrimination between who gives what. But it was something. It's seemingly, again, you could probably figure it out how much it was actually worth, half shekel of kesef. But it was something that seemingly everybody could afford. Yeah, not exorbitant though. Yeah. Okay. Great. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Great. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
I hope we
Thank
get more
you.
snow. I can't wait.